Sometimes the smallest things hide the heaviest truths. A simple flower, carried in the small hand of a young boy, may seem harmless, sweet, even innocent. But behind that flower could be a story so heavy it bends the heart of the one who receives it. This story is set in America, in a quiet town where life moved with ordinary rhythms. School buses rumble through neighborhoods, children play on sidewalks, and teachers step into classrooms carrying the weight of both lesson plans and unspoken burdens. But one morning, a young black boy walks into school with flowers clutched tight in his hands. His teacher smiles when she sees him. She expects a gesture of kindness, maybe something simple that children do to feel special. But the reason for those flowers, the real reason, will leave her trembling and crying in a way no one in that classroom will ever forget. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The morning began like any other in the small American town of Maplewood. The sun had just started to rise over rows of modest houses, painting the sky with soft streaks of orange and pink. A chilly breeze swept through the streets as children in backpacks walked to corner bus stops, their laughter mixing with the distant hum of car engines. Mrs. Thompson, a fifth-grade teacher at Maplewood Elementary, sipped her coffee slowly as she sat in her car in the school parking lot. She had been teaching for nearly 15 years, and though she loved her job, she knew the weight it carried. Every child brought a different story into her classroom, stories that sometimes stretched far beyond homework and reading tests. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and whispered to herself, one day at a time. Inside the school, the hallways filled quickly. Children dropped their coats into cubbies. Sneakers squeaked on the tile floor, and the chatter of friends catching up after the weekend filled the air. Mrs. Thompson straightened her blouse, grabbed her lesson plan book, and walked into room 12 with her usual calm but firm stride. The desks were arranged neatly, sunlight streaming across the tops, and on the chalkboard she had written in big letters, "Welcome to a new week." She smiled when the first students walked in, some still rubbing their eyes, others buzzing with energy. That was when she noticed him. Darius. He was small for his age, barely reaching the shoulders of the other 10-year-olds, with skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that carried a quietness far older than he was. He walked in clutching something in his hands. Mrs. Thompson's eyes flicked down and froze for a second. It was a bunch of flowers. Not the kind you bought from a fancy shop. These were uneven, some stems too long, others too short, petals slightly bruised. A few were wildflowers, probably picked from yards or by the roadside. But Darius held them carefully, almost protectively, as if they were worth more than gold. Mrs. Thompson blinked. Children sometimes brought her little gifts, a drawing, an apple, even a rock they thought looked cool. But flowers like these, carried with such seriousness, caught her off guard. "Good morning, Darius," she said gently, crouching a little to meet his eyes. "Those are beautiful. Are they for someone special?" He nodded, his lips pressed tight. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to speak, but the words seemed trapped. Instead, he held them out to her. "For you, ma'am." Mrs. Thompson's chest tightened. She took the flowers, careful not to crush them, and placed them on her desk in an empty mug. The other students glanced curiously, some whispering to each other, but Darius walked silently to a seat in the third row and pulled out his notebook. The morning lessons began. Math problems filled the board. Pencils scratched against paper, and the classroom carried the usual hum of concentration and occasional giggles. But Mrs. Thompson found her eyes drifting again and again to the flowers sitting in that mug. Their colors brightened her desk, but something about them unsettled her. Darius kept his head down all morning. He worked quickly, neatly, answering questions when called on, but otherwise stayed silent. No mischief, no whispers with his classmates, no restless tapping of feet. Just quiet. When recess came, the children rushed out to the playground, their laughter echoing through the hallways. Mrs. Thompson stayed behind, tidying her desk, but she noticed Darius lingering by the door. "You're not going out, Darius?" she asked. He shook his head. "I'll stay here if that's okay." "Of course," she said softly. "You can read or draw if you like." For a while, silence filled the room, broken only by the distant sound of children shouting outside. Mrs. Thompson finally turned to him. "Those flowers. They're very thoughtful. Did you pick them yourself?" Darius hesitated, then nodded, his small hands fiddled with the edge of his notebook. "Yeah, from different places." "Why did you bring them today?" she asked carefully. His eyes flickered up to hers for the briefest second, then back down. His voice, when it came, was low, almost shaky. "Because of my mom." Mrs. Thompson froze. Something in the way he said those words pressed at her chest. "Is your mom okay?" she asked gently. Darius pressed his lips together again, as if afraid to say more. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "She told me to." Mrs. Thompson's breath caught, but before she could ask more, the recess bell rang. Children poured back into the classroom, filling it again with noise and energy. Darius quickly bent his head over his book, hiding whatever emotion had flickered across his face. The rest of the day went on, but the unease in Mrs. Thompson's chest grew heavier. Every time she looked at the flowers, she felt a tug of worry, a question scratching at the back of her mind. That evening, when the last bell rang and the students hurried home, Darius was the last to leave. He packed his backpack slowly, almost reluctantly. Mrs. Thompson approached him once more. "Darius," she said softly, "thank you again for the flowers. They mean a lot, but I want you to know you can always talk to me about anything. Do you understand?" He nodded, though he still didn't meet her eyes. Then he slipped out of the room and disappeared into the crowded hallway. Mrs. Thompson stood alone in the empty classroom, staring at the flowers on her desk. Their petals seemed to whisper something she couldn't quite hear. She felt a chill she couldn't explain, as though the flowers weren't just a gift, but a message she wasn't ready to understand. The next morning at Maplewood Elementary started with a drizzle. Gray clouds hung low over the schoolyard, and the smell of damp grass clung to the air. Children ran into the building with jackets pulled tight, shaking raindrops from their hoods. The hallways were noisier than usual, filled with the excitement of kids escaping the weather. Mrs. Thompson walked briskly into room 12, setting down her umbrella and bag. The flowers from yesterday still sat on her desk, their colors dulled slightly overnight. She found herself staring at them again, replaying Darius's quiet words in her mind. "Because of my mom. She told me to." It wasn't unusual for children to mention their parents in passing, but something in the tone of his voice had unsettled her. It wasn't cheerful, it wasn't casual, it had been almost heavy, like a stone he could barely carry. The students began pouring into the room, laughing and dripping from rain. Backpacks hit the floor, chairs scraped against the tiles, and chatter filled the air. Mrs. Thompson smiled warmly, greeting each one by name, but her eyes searched for Darius. He came in last, as usual. He moved quietly, his shoulders slightly hunched as though trying to make himself invisible. But today, he wasn't carrying flowers. His hands were empty, tucked deep into the pockets of his worn jacket. "Good morning, Darius," Mrs. Thompson said softly. "Good morning, ma'am," he replied, his voice low. He slid into a seat quickly, pulling out his notebook without looking up. The day's lessons began, but Mrs. Thompson couldn't stop noticing the way Darius seemed distant. During reading, he stared at the pages without really turning them. During math, he solved problems fast, almost mechanically, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. At lunch, when the other children ran to the cafeteria, he stayed behind again. Mrs. Thompson finally decided she couldn't ignore it anymore. "Darius," she said gently when the classroom was empty, "why don't you come sit up here with me for a moment?" He hesitated, then stood and walked to her desk. His sneakers squeaked slightly on the damp floor. "Yesterday you gave me those flowers," she began. "That was very thoughtful. But you said something about your mom. Do you want to tell me more about that?" Darius shifted from foot to foot, his eyes fixed on the floor. She told me to bring them," he murmured. "And why did she want you to bring them to me?" Mrs. Thompson asked. He hesitated, biting his lip. Then he whispered, "Because you're kind." Her heart squeezed. That was very sweet of her to say. "But Darius, is everything okay at home?" This time he froze. His small fists clenched at his sides, and his breathing hitched just a little. Mrs. Thompson leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You don't have to tell me everything right now. But if something is wrong, I want you to know you're not alone." Darius's eyes finally lifted to hers. For a moment they glistened, like he might cry, but then the bell rang and the hallway filled with the noise of students returning. He quickly turned and went back to his seat, shutting down the fragile moment like a door slamming shut. Mrs. Thompson felt her stomach twist with worry. Something was wrong. She didn't know what, but she knew. That afternoon, as the children worked on their science projects, a small commotion broke out near the back of the room. A boy named Marcus had knocked over his water bottle, spilling it across the desk. The other kids shouted, laughing, and scrambling to move their papers away. Mrs. Thompson rushed over to help. In the middle of the chaos, she noticed Darius sitting perfectly still, staring at the spreading water. His jaw tightened, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. It was almost as if the noise around him faded away and he was somewhere else entirely. "Darius," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He blinked, shaking his head quickly, and looked up. "Sorry, ma'am. I was just thinking. Are you sure you're all right?" "Yes, ma'am," he said quickly, pulling his notebook closer. But his face told another story. By dismissal, Mrs. Thompson knew she couldn't ignore her instincts. After the students left, she sat at her desk and pulled out the school file on Darius. Every teacher kept notes, grades, attendance, family contact information. His mother's name was listed as Angela Brooks. The emergency contact line was blank. She frowned. That wasn't unusual for some families, but it struck her as odd that there wasn't even a phone number filled in properly. The address was written in neat handwriting, but something about the empty lines on the form made her uneasy. Just then, Mr. Harris, the gym teacher, poked his head in. "Hey, Rebecca, you staying late again?" Mrs. Thompson looked up, startled. "Just finishing some paperwork. Don't stay too late. It's pouring out there," he said, tipping his cap before heading down the hall. She nodded, though her thoughts were still on Darius. She picked up the flowers from her desk, turning them slowly in her hands. Their petals had started to wilt, bending under their own weight. That night at home, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She sat at her kitchen table with her dinner untouched, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. She thought about his small hands clutching the flowers, the way his voice had trembled when he spoke about his mom, the way his eyes had filled with something he was too afraid to say. She didn't know what it was yet, but she knew this. Something about those flowers wasn't just a gift. They were a signal. The next morning, she made a decision. She would find out more. At recess, while the kids ran outside, Mrs. Thompson walked down the quiet hallway to the main office. The secretary, a cheerful woman named Janet, was typing away at her computer. "Janet," Mrs. Thompson said carefully, "do we have updated contact information for Angela Brooks, Darius's mother?" Janet tapped a few keys, frowning. Doesn't look like it. Last time she filled out the form was over a year ago. Why? Is something wrong?" Mrs. Thompson hesitated. She didn't want to start rumors. I'd like to check in with her. Darius has seemed a little off lately." Janet sighed. "I'll see if I can track down a number. Sometimes these parents are hard to reach." Mrs. Thompson nodded, forcing a smile, but her worry deepened. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, she noticed Darius moving slower than the other children again. He lingered at his desk, fiddling with the zipper of his backpack. She walked over. "Darius," she said softly, "how about I walk with you today?" His eyes widened for a moment, then he shrugged. "Okay." They walked together down the front steps of the school, the air damp with the smell of fresh rain. Children scattered in all directions, running to waiting parents or buses. Darius walked quietly beside her, his small frame hunched against the breeze. At the corner, he paused. "You don't have to come any further," he said quickly. "Are you sure?" she asked. He nodded firmly. "Yes, ma'am." But as he turned to walk down the street alone, Mrs. Thompson felt a chill of unease crawl up her spine. Something about the way he hurried off, his small figure swallowed by the shadows of the neighborhood, told her that the flowers were just the beginning, and she wasn't ready for what she might uncover next. The following day started with a brightness that didn't match Mrs. Thompson's mood. The sky was clear, the sun glared across the playground, and children came bouncing into school with energy that seemed endless. But her eyes kept drifting toward the door of room 12, waiting for one face. Darius walked in quietly, as always. His clothes were a little wrinkled, his shoes scuffed from use, and his backpack sagged as though it carried more weight than it should. Mrs. Thompson noticed he didn't look at anyone, not even the boys who usually teased him for being so quiet. He just slid into a seat and opened his notebook. "Good morning, Darius," she said with a smile. He glanced up briefly. "Good morning, ma'am." The day's lessons began: spelling tests, reading practice, and a history discussion about famous American leaders. But even as she taught, Mrs. Thompson found herself studying Darius in small, secret glances. He rarely lifted his eyes. His pencil moved quickly when he wrote, but there was no lightness, no joy. Halfway through the morning, she noticed something else. He hadn't eaten his breakfast snack. Most children tore through their granola bars or fruit cups by the first break. Darius just pushed his food aside, untouched. At lunch, when the classroom emptied, she quietly walked over to his desk. The granola bar still sat there. She frowned, tucking it into her pocket. When the children came back from the cafeteria, Darius looked even quieter than before. He sat through the science lesson with his hands folded, his eyes staring at the board but not really seeing it. Mrs. Thompson finally decided she couldn't let another day pass without doing something. When the final bell rang, she called gently, "Darius, could you stay back for just a minute?" The other children bustled out, throwing on backpacks and jackets. Darius lingered by his desk, his body tense. "Come sit up here with me," she said. He walked slowly to her desk, dragging his feet a little. Mrs. Thompson kept her voice soft. "I've noticed you haven't been eating much, Darius. And yesterday you seemed worried. Is something going on at home?" His lips pressed together. His shoulders lifted slightly, as if bracing for something. Then he whispered, "No, ma'am. Everything's fine." But the way he said it told her the opposite. "Darius, listen to me," she said, leaning forward. "I want you to know I care about you. If something is hard at home, you can tell me. I won't be upset with you." He stared at the floor. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost too quietly to hear, he muttered, "I have to take care of things." Mrs. Thompson frowned. "What do you mean, take care of things?" But before he could answer, a knock came at the door. The janitor poked his head in. "Mrs. Thompson, just a reminder, they're locking the back gate soon." She nodded. "Thank you." When she turned back, Darius was already slinging his backpack over his shoulder. His eyes darted toward the door, as if afraid of staying longer. I have to go, he said quickly. Darius, wait. But he was already halfway down the hall, moving fast. Mrs. Thompson sighed, her heart pounding. She felt as if she were trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. Every time she reached out, he slipped away. That night, she drove home in silence. The streets were quiet, lined with modest houses and the occasional barking dog. But her mind stayed on Darius. His words echoed. I have to take care of things. Take care of what? By the time she pulled into her driveway, she knew she couldn't let it rest. She set her bag down, grabbed her phone, and called Janet from the office. Janet, it's Rebecca Thompson. Did you ever find contact information for Darius's mom? Janet hesitated. I tried calling the number we had on file, but it's disconnected. I'll keep digging. Please do, Mrs. Thompson said. It's important. She hung up, her stomach in knots. The next morning, she was determined to watch more closely. During reading time, she moved around the classroom, checking students' work. When she reached Darius's desk, she noticed something. His hands were trembling slightly. Not much, but enough for her to see when he held his pencil. Are you feeling okay, Darius? She asked softly. Yes, ma'am, he replied quickly, but she didn't believe him. Later, during recess, she walked outside with the children. Most of them ran to the swings or played tag, but Darius sat alone on the edge of the playground, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. She walked over and sat beside him on the bench. Why don't you play with the others? He shrugged. I don't feel like it. Do you ever feel like it? She asked gently. He hesitated. Not much. Mrs. Thompson studied him for a moment. Then she said, Darius, can I ask you something? Those flowers you brought me. Your mom told you to bring them, right? He nodded slowly. Was that before or after she got sick? His eyes widened. His whole body stiffened. Who told you she was sick? No one, Mrs. Thompson said softly. But I can see something is wrong. You don't have to hide it from me. For a moment, she thought he might open up. His lips parted, his eyes filled with something raw, something close to breaking. But then, just as quickly, he shut down again. I have to go, he said, standing abruptly. Darius. But he had already walked away, moving faster than before. That afternoon, Mrs. Thompson sat at her desk long after children left. The flowers, now wilted, still sat in the mug. She touched one of the petals, brittle between her fingers, and felt a shiver of dread. She knew one thing for certain. Whatever Darius was carrying, it was too heavy for a child his age. And unless she found a way to help, the truth behind those flowers might crush them both. That night, she made a choice. She would go to the address on a school form herself. It wasn't just about being a teacher anymore. It was about being human. Saturday morning in Maplewood was usually quiet. Lawnmowers buzzed in the distance, dogs barked in fenced yards, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from open kitchen windows. But for Mrs. Thompson, it was not a morning of rest. She stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what to wear, her hands trembling slightly as she buttoned her blouse. Today, she had made up her mind. She was going to visit the address on Darius's school form. It wasn't standard for teachers to show up at students' homes unannounced, but something in her heart told her waiting any longer would be wrong. She had replayed the look in Darius's eyes over and over again, how he shut down whenever she asked about his mother. Those flowers, that trembling in his hands, the words, I have to take care of things. She couldn't ignore it anymore. By mid-morning, she was in her car, a small sedan that rattled when the engine started. She gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, her chest tightening with each block she drove. The town shifted as she went deeper into the neighborhoods. The well-kept houses with trimmed hedges gave way to older homes with peeling paint and cracked sidewalks. The yards were smaller, some with rusting bikes lying on their sides, some with broken fences leaning dangerously. She glanced down at the paper with the address again, 1432 Maple Street. Her car slowed as she turned onto the narrow street. Half the houses looked worn down, blinds hanging unevenly in windows, front steps crumbling. At the far end, she spotted the number painted faintly on a crooked mailbox, 1432. The house was small, its paint faded a dull gray. The curtains in the front window were drawn tight. A broken swing hung from the porch, creaking in the breeze. Mrs. Thompson parked a little way down, gathering her breath before stepping out. The sidewalk was cracked under her shoes as she walked toward the house. With each step, her pulse quickened. She raised her hand and knocked gently on the door. Silence. She knocked again, a little louder. Hello? Is anyone home? For a moment, she thought no one would answer. Then, faintly, she heard movement inside. A shuffle, a cough. Finally, the door creaked open just an inch. A boy's face peeked through, the same small, solemn eyes she saw in her classroom every day. Darius, she breathed softly. It's me, Mrs. Thompson. His eyes widened in shock. What are you doing here? I just wanted to check on you. May I come in? He shook his head quickly, panic flashing across his face. No, you can't. It's not. It's not a good time. Darius, she said gently, keeping her voice low, I'm not here to cause trouble. I only want to make sure you and your mom are okay. He looked over his shoulder, then back at her, biting his lip. After a long pause, he whispered, She's sleeping. She doesn't like visitors. Mrs. Thompson's heart sank. She crouched a little to meet his eye level. Is she sick, Darius? His throat bobbed as he swallowed. For a moment, it seemed like he would say something. Then, from deeper in the house, a sound drifted out, a weak, hoarse voice calling, Darius? The boy's head whipped around. His voice shook. I have to go. And before Mrs. Thompson could say another word, the door shut firmly in her face. She stood there on the porch, frozen. That single word, his mother's voice, frail and strained, echoed in her mind. Her stomach clenched. Whatever was happening inside that house, it wasn't simple. As she walked back to her car, her eyes swept across the yard. She noticed something. The flowers, small wildflowers, scattered near the edges of the fence, growing untended. The same kind he had brought to her. She sat in her car for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel. She wanted to march back up and demand answers, but she knew she couldn't push him too hard. Not yet. She would have to find another way. Back at school on Monday, she watched Darius more closely than ever. He came in on time, but his shoulders seemed heavier, his steps slower. His notebook pages were filled with neat handwriting, but his eyes drooped as if he hadn't slept. During reading, another student dropped a stack of books with a loud crash. The sound startled Darius so badly he flinched, his pencil snapping in his hand. The other children laughed lightly, but Mrs. Thompson caught the moment. His breathing quickened, and he clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened. She quickly crossed the room. Darius, step outside with me for a moment, she said gently. In the hallway, away from the chatter, she crouched down again. Honey, are you getting enough rest at night? He avoided her gaze. I'm fine. You don't look fine, she said softly. You look tired and scared. His small chest rose and fell quickly. Finally, in a low whisper, he said, I can't let anyone know. Mrs. Thompson's heart ached. No, what, sweetheart? His eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them away fast, shaking his head. Nothing. I have to go back in. And just like that, he slipped past her and back into the classroom. That afternoon, Mrs. Thompson sat at her desk long after the students left. The classroom grew quiet, the hallways echoing with the sound of custodians cleaning. She stared at the flowers still sitting on her desk, brown and wilted now, their stems bent, their petals falling. She thought of his words again. I can't let anyone know. It was clear now. Darius wasn't just shy or struggling with schoolwork. He was hiding something, protecting something. And Mrs. Thompson knew she couldn't stay silent much longer. The next step would mean risk. It would mean stepping into his world in a way that teachers usually didn't. But she was ready, because behind those flowers was a truth that was breaking a child apart, and she was determined to find it. The following week felt heavier than usual for Mrs. Thompson. She carried on teaching as always math problems, spelling words, group projects, but in the back of her mind, the image of Darius standing at that doorway, blocking her from entering, wouldn't leave. His mother's weak voice calling his name had replayed in her head every night since. She had a choice to make. On Tuesday afternoon, while the students worked quietly on their writing assignments, she pulled a chair beside Darius's desk. He sat hunched, gripping his pencil so tightly the wood nearly bent. Darius, she said softly, may I read what you're writing? He froze for a moment, then slowly slid the paper toward her. His words were neat, but the story made her chest tighten. It was about a boy who lived in a house with broken windows and had to be the man of the house, even though he was still a child. The boy in the story cooked, cleaned, and took care of his mother. Mrs. Thompson looked up at him. Is this about you? His eyes flickered with panic. No, ma'am. Just made it up. She didn't press further, but the answer told her enough. At dismissal, she watched him walk out the school gates. Most children ran into the arms of waiting parents, but Darius walked alone, his small backpack bouncing with each step. She couldn't help but notice how carefully he looked both ways before crossing the street, how he moved with a seriousness most 10-year-olds didn't carry. That evening, she made another decision. If the school office couldn't reach his mother, she would go higher. She called the district social worker, a woman named Mrs. Garcia. Rebecca, thank you for calling, Mrs. Garcia said over the phone. What's concerning you about this student? Mrs. Thompson took a deep breath. He's withdrawn. He's exhausted. He hasn't been eating. I visited his house, and I could hear his mother inside. Her voice sounded weak. I don't know what's going on, but something is very wrong. Mrs. Garcia paused. You did the right thing by reaching out. I'll schedule a home visit. Relief washed over Mrs. Thompson, but also fear. She knew children often got scared when outsiders stepped in. Would Darius shut down completely if he found out she called someone? The next morning, she noticed Darius was even quieter than before. He didn't raise his hand once. When the other children laughed at a joke, his face stayed blank. During art class, instead of drawing colorful pictures like the others, he sketched a house. His lines were sharp, dark, and heavy, the kind of drawing that carried more than just imagination. Mrs. Thompson leaned over. "That's a very strong drawing, Darius. Is this your home?" He quickly covered the paper with his arm. "No." She nodded, not pushing him, but inside, her worry grew deeper. 2 days later, Mrs. Garcia arrived at the school. She was a tall woman with calm eyes, dressed neatly in a navy suit. She pulled Mrs. Thompson aside in the hallway. "I visited the home this morning," Mrs. Garcia said quietly. His mother answered the door. "She's very ill, Rebecca. She's thin, weak, and struggling to walk. She admitted she hasn't been able to work for months. Darius has been caring for her almost entirely on his own." Mrs. Thompson's breath caught. "Oh my God. He's been cooking, cleaning, even making sure she takes her medication." Mrs. Garcia continued. "He's been holding the household together. That explains his exhaustion. The flowers he brought you? She told me she asked him to do it. She wanted to thank you for being kind to him." Tears pricked Mrs. Thompson's eyes. She pictured that small boy walking in with those uneven flowers, clutching them with all the weight of his mother's gratitude. "What happens now?" she asked. Mrs. Garcia sighed. "We're arranging medical assistance for the mother. But Rebecca, the truth is, they've been surviving in silence. If you hadn't spoken up, no one would have known." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her chest heavy. She felt both relieved and broken at the same time. That afternoon, when the students packed up to leave, she called softly, "Darius, could you stay back for just a minute?" He hesitated, eyes darting nervously. "Am I in trouble?" "Of course not," she said warmly. "Just want to talk." He lingered by her desk, clutching the straps of his backpack. "Darius," she began carefully, "I know things have been hard for you. I know you've been taking care of your mom." His eyes widened. His small hands gripped tighter. "Who told you?" "Don't be upset," she said quickly. "I just want you to know you're not alone anymore. People want to help." His jaw tightened. "We don't need help." Her heart broke at the firmness in his voice. "Sweetheart, even heroes need help sometimes." He blinked fast, his eyes glistening. "She told me not to tell anyone." Mrs. Thompson reached across her desk, resting her hand gently over his. "Sometimes moms say that because they don't want to worry you, but worrying alone can hurt even more." For the first time, his shoulders sagged. His chest rose and fell quickly, and then in the smallest voice he whispered, "I don't want her to die." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She fought to keep her face calm, even as her heart cracked. She squeezed his hand. "That's why we're going to make sure she gets the help she needs. You don't have to carry this by yourself anymore, Darius." He sniffled, quickly wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Promise?" "I promise," she whispered. At that moment, the final bell rang. The sound of children rushing out filled the halls. But inside room 12, time seemed to slow. A teacher and a boy sat quietly, both carrying the weight of flowers that had meant so much more than anyone had realized. Mrs. Thompson knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew the silence had been broken, and that was the beginning of change. The days that followed moved slower for Mrs. Thompson. Every time she looked at Darius in class, she thought about his whispered words. "I don't want her to die." They rang in her mind during lessons, during grading, even when she tried to sleep. At school, Darius remained quiet, but there was a small shift. He still carried himself with the same seriousness, but now there was a faint awareness in his eyes, like he knew she understood more than before. He didn't speak of it, but sometimes when their eyes met, there was a silent exchange. "You know my secret. You see me." One Thursday afternoon, while the class worked on group projects, Mrs. Thompson noticed Darius's attention slipping. He kept glancing at the clock, his leg bouncing nervously. When the bell rang, he bolted from his seat faster than usual. Mrs. Thompson quickly gathered her things and followed a little behind him, curious. From the school gates, she watched him walk quickly down the street, cutting across the corner store parking lot. He didn't stop to play like other kids or talk to anyone. His pace grew quicker the closer he got to his neighborhood. Mrs. Thompson didn't want to intrude too far, so she stopped at the corner, watching him disappear toward Maple Street. She sighed, realizing this was his routine. School, then straight home. No breaks. A boy who had traded childhood for responsibility. The next morning, Darius came in late. His hair was uncombed, and he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. Mrs. Thompson crouched by his desk. "Rough night?" she asked softly. He gave a small nod but said nothing. During recess, she asked him to help her stack books in the corner of the classroom. As they worked, she spoke gently. "Darius, when you leave school so quickly every day, is it because your mom needs you right away?" He froze, clutching a book tightly. For a moment, she thought he might drop it. Then he whispered, "She needs me all the time." Mrs. Thompson's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "She can't get up much," he said softly. "Sometimes she doesn't eat unless I make her. Sometimes she's too tired to even talk." Mrs. Thompson swallowed hard. "That must be a lot for you." He shrugged, trying to act strong, but his voice wavered. "I just do it. I don't have a choice." She wanted to hug him right there, but she knew he wouldn't want that in front of his classmates. Instead, she placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. "You are doing so much, Darius. But remember, you don't have to do it all alone anymore. Do you remember what I told you? People are going to help now." He nodded faintly, though his eyes showed doubt. That weekend, Mrs. Garcia, the social worker, returned to Darius's house with a nurse. They brought groceries and checked on his mother, Angela. When Mrs. Thompson heard about it Monday morning, she felt relief. But when she saw Darius that day, he didn't look relieved. He looked tense, as if the new attention scared him. At lunch, she sat beside him quietly. "I heard Mrs. Garcia came by again. How did it go?" He shrugged, pushing his food around his tray. "Mom doesn't like strangers. She says people will think she's weak." Mrs. Thompson's heart ached. "Asking for help doesn't make her weak, Darius. It makes her strong because she's thinking of you." He didn't respond, but his lips pressed into a thin line. Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. A fight broke out between two boys during recess. Kids shouted. Teachers rushed over, and in the middle of the commotion, Darius stood frozen, his body stiff. His eyes darted back and forth as though the shouting triggered something inside him. Mrs. Thompson noticed immediately. She pulled him gently aside, away from the chaos. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe." He blinked rapidly, his breathing quick. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "That's what it's like at home sometimes." Mrs. Thompson's blood chilled. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" But before he could answer, the bell rang, and the children rushed back inside. The moment slipped away, but the meaning did not. That evening, Mrs. Thompson couldn't sit still. She paced her living room, replaying his words. His mother was sick, that much she knew. But now there was something else. Fighting, shouting, a house filled with tension beyond just illness. She decided she had to go back. Saturday came, and Mrs. Thompson drove once more to Maple Street. The air was heavy with the smell of rain from the night before. She parked at the corner and walked toward the small, faded house. This time, she didn't knock right away. She stood at the edge of the yard, looking. The curtains were still drawn tight. The porch sagged slightly under the weight of years without repair. And there, just by the fence, more wildflowers grew, the same kind Darius had picked for her. Finally, she stepped onto the porch and knocked. There was a long pause. Then the door creaked open, and Angela stood there. Mrs. Thompson felt her breath catch. Angela looked frail, her face pale, her body thin as though the wind itself could carry her away. Her eyes were kind, but shadowed by exhaustion. "Yes," Angela said weakly. "Hello," Mrs. Thompson said softly. "I'm Darius's teacher. I just wanted to check on you." Angela gave a tired smile. "He talks about you. He says you're kind." Mrs. Thompson's throat tightened. "He's a wonderful boy. Very strong." Angela nodded slowly, then coughed into her sleeve. He does too much for me. I tell him he's just a boy, but he doesn't listen. He wants to be the man." Mrs. Thompson's heart cracked. She reached out, resting a gentle hand on the doorframe. "He loves you deeply. That's why." Angela's eyes glistened. "He brought you flowers, didn't he?" "I told him to. I wanted to thank you." Mrs. Thompson swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes, he did. They were beautiful." For a moment, silence filled the doorway. The sound of distant dogs barking and children playing down the street carried faintly. Then Angela whispered, "Please, don't let them take him away from me." The words pierced Mrs. Thompson like a blade. She wanted to respond, but behind Angela, she saw Darius standing in the dim hallway, his small figure tense, his eyes wide. And in that moment, Mrs. Thompson knew the truth. The flowers had been more than gratitude. They had been a shield, a plea, a boy's fragile attempt to hold his world together. And the weight of that truth pressed down harder than ever. The image of Angela's pale face and trembling words haunted Mrs. Thompson all weekend. "Don't let them take him away from me." It replayed in her mind whenever she tried to focus on something else. Angela wasn't just sick. She was afraid. And Darius. He was caught in the middle, holding his fragile world together with the strength of a child. Monday morning, the classroom bustled with noise as children settled in. Darius walked in quietly, carrying his backpack with one strap hanging low. His eyes looked tired again, but he forced a small smile when Mrs. Thompson greeted him. She noticed something different. His shirt was wrinkled, and there was a faint stain near the collar, as though laundry hadn't been done. Mrs. Thompson felt a sharp pang in her chest. These were the kinds of small details that revealed more than words. During math, Darius struggled to keep his eyes open. His pencil slipped from his fingers twice. Mrs. Thompson leaned over his desk. "Did you sleep last night?" she whispered. He shook his head faintly. "Mom was coughing. I had to help her." Her heart clenched. "You need rest too, Darius. You can't take care of her if you get sick yourself." He didn't answer. He just looked down, eyes glassy, before returning to his work. That afternoon, when the final bell rang, Mrs. Thompson lingered at the school doors. She watched Darius hurry down the street, his backpack bouncing. Something inside her urged her to follow, not out of curiosity, but because she couldn't shake the feeling that something was unraveling in his world. So she did, keeping a careful distance. She trailed him past the corner store, down Maple Street, and toward his house. He didn't notice her. His focus was straight ahead, his stride fast and determined. When he reached the front porch, the door swung open before he could even knock. A man stood there. Mrs. Thompson froze. The man wasn't someone she had seen before. Tall, broad shoulders, his posture rough. His clothes were worn, and his face was hard, carrying the look of someone who had lived a difficult life. Darius stopped in his tracks, his body stiffening the moment he saw him. The man said something Mrs. Thompson couldn't hear, then stepped aside. Darius hesitated before going inside. The door shut behind him. Mrs. Thompson's stomach knotted. Who was that man? The next day at school, Darius seemed even quieter. He didn't laugh when the other boys joked. He didn't join the girls when they asked him to play tag. At lunch, he picked at a sandwich, hardly eating. Mrs. Thompson sat down across from him. "Everything okay at home?" she asked gently. His eyes flickered up, then down. "It's fine." But his voice was tight, forced. She leaned closer. "Darius, you can tell me the truth. I'm here to listen." He gripped his sandwich tightly, his small fingers pressing hard. Finally, he whispered, "That man, he makes Mom cry sometimes." Mrs. Thompson's breath caught. "Who is he?" Darius shrugged. "He says he's family. He says he wants to help. But sometimes he yells. Loud." Her hands trembled slightly under the table. "Has he hurt you, Darius?" Darius shook his head quickly, almost offensively. "No, he doesn't touch me. But when he yells at Mom, it's bad." Mrs. Thompson's chest tightened. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. Angela was sick, vulnerable, and now there was someone else in the house. Someone unpredictable. That evening, Mrs. Thompson called Mrs. Garcia, the social worker. She explained everything she had seen, the strange man, Darius's tiredness, his words about shouting in tears. Mrs. Garcia's voice was calm but firm. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "We'll look into it immediately. Please, keep supporting Darius at school. He trusts you." The following day, Mrs. Garcia visited the house with another staff member. Mrs. Thompson wasn't there, but she thought about it all day, her stomach in knots. When the final bell rang, she caught Darius by the doorway. "How was your mom today?" she asked. He hesitated, then whispered. "They came again. The lady and the other man." He didn't like it. Mrs. Thompson frowned. "Who didn't?" "The man. The one in the house. He told me not to talk to them." Mrs. Thompson bent down, her voice low and steady. "Darius, listen to me. If anyone scares you or your mom, you need to tell me. Do you understand?" He nodded slowly, but his eyes darted nervously toward the window, as though afraid someone might hear. That night, Mrs. Thompson barely slept. She pictured Angela coughing in her small bedroom, Darius trying to comfort her, and that unknown man shouting, his presence filling the house with fear. The suspense pressed down on her chest like a weight. On Friday morning, something unusual happened. Darius walked into class, carrying another small bunch of flowers. Wildflowers again, their stems uneven, their petals delicate. He placed them on her desk without a word. Mrs. Thompson picked them up gently. "These are beautiful, Darius." "Thank you." He gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Instead, his face carried a strange mix of pride and sadness, as though the flowers were more than just a gift. They were a message. During reading time, Mrs. Thompson sat at her desk, staring at the flowers. Why now? Why another bouquet? Then she remembered Angela's words. "He brought you flowers, didn't he?" "I told him to. I wanted to thank you. But this time felt different. This time, it wasn't gratitude. It was something else. A cry for help, maybe." And as the classroom buzzed with children reading aloud, Mrs. Thompson realized her heart was beating faster, her mind racing with unanswered questions. The flowers weren't just flowers. They were warnings. Friday afternoon, when the last student left the classroom, Mrs. Thompson stayed behind. She sat at her desk staring at the bunch of wildflowers Darius had placed earlier. Their petals looked fresh, almost as if he had picked them on his way to school. But what unsettled her most wasn't the flowers themselves. It was the quiet look in his eyes when he gave them to her. There was something unspoken behind that look, something heavy. That evening, Mrs. Thompson drove home with the flowers resting carefully on the passenger seat. She replayed everything she had seen over the last week. Angela's pale face, The strange man on the porch, Darius's tired eyes, his whispered words about shouting inside the house. None of it fit neatly together, but she knew one thing for certain. Darius and his mother were in trouble. By Saturday morning, she couldn't keep her thoughts to herself anymore. She called Mrs. Garcia, the social worker. "I can't shake this feeling," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice low. "The flowers," he brought them again. "I think he's trying to tell me something without saying it." Mrs. Garcia paused for a moment, then said, "You may be right. Sometimes kids use actions when words feel unsafe. I'll make another visit." That same afternoon, Mrs. Garcia went to the house. Mrs. Thompson didn't follow this time, but she sat by her window at home, restless, waiting for some kind of update. Hours passed with no call. The suspense gnawed at her, each tick of the clock tightening the knot in her chest. On Monday, Darius came to school, but something about him had changed. He walked slower, his shoulders slumped. When Mrs. Thompson greeted him, he gave a small nod but kept his eyes down. She waited until reading hour before crouching beside his desk. "How's your mom?" His lips pressed tight. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he whispered, "She's tired. The man gets mad when the lady comes." Mrs. Thompson felt her pulse quicken. Did the man hurt her? Darius shook his head, but the hesitation in his eyes made her uncertain. "He just yells. A lot. He says if we don't listen, bad things will happen." Mrs. Thompson steadied her breathing. She didn't want to scare him further. "You're very brave, Darius. Remember, you're not alone." At recess, Darius didn't join the other kids. Instead, he sat under the shade of a tree, staring at the ground. Mrs. Thompson stood by the window, watching. Her instincts screamed at her. This wasn't just about poverty or sickness anymore. Something dangerous was unfolding. That afternoon, after dismissal, she drove toward Darius's neighborhood again. She parked a short distance away, heart pounding, as she spotted the small house at the corner. The blinds were half closed, but faint shadows moved inside. Then, suddenly, a sound cut through the air, a man's voice, harsh, shouting. Even from her car, she could hear the edge of anger in it. She gripped the steering wheel, frozen. Seconds later, the front door opened, and Darius stepped out. He looked around nervously, then sat on the porch steps, hugging his knees. Mrs. Thompson's chest tightened. She wanted to go to him, to say something, but fear rooted her to the seat. She didn't want to make things worse. So she stayed hidden, her eyes locked on the boy who seemed far too young to be carrying such a heavy burden. The next morning, Darius walked into class with another flower. Just one this time. A single daisy, its stem bent, its petals slightly wilted. He placed it on her desk silently before heading to his seat. Mrs. Thompson picked it up slowly. Her throat tightened. A single flower, fragile and worn, felt like a symbol, a warning, a plea. She couldn't ignore it any longer. That evening, she met with Mrs. Garcia at the district office. She told her everything. The flowers, the shouting, Darius's exhaustion. Mrs. Garcia listened intently, taking notes. "You're right to be concerned," she said firmly. "If this man is threatening them, we need to act quickly. I'll arrange a formal welfare check with the authorities." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her heart racing. The thought of police stepping into Darius's fragile world scared her, but she knew it might be the only way to protect him and his mother. The following week brought a storm. Rain poured over the town, washing the streets in heavy gray. On Tuesday morning, as students rushed into class dripping wet, Mrs. Thompson noticed something. Darius wasn't among them. Her stomach dropped. She waited, glancing at the clock, but he never came. By lunchtime, her worry had spiraled. She called Mrs. Garcia, but her line went to voicemail. Pacing her classroom, Mrs. Thompson felt panic building in her chest. Where was he? On Wednesday, Darius returned. His eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept. His shirt was buttoned wrong, and there was a faint bruise near his wrist. Mrs. Thompson's hands shook as she guided him to his desk. "Darius," she whispered, "what happened?" He looked away, his voice barely audible. He said, "I can't tell. If I tell, he'll make Mom worse." Tears stung her eyes, but she forced herself to stay steady. "You're safe here," she told him gently. "No one can hurt you in this classroom." But inside, her heart was racing. The bruise, the fear in his voice, it was escalating. That evening, as thunder rolled across the sky, Mrs. Thompson sat at her kitchen table. The flowers from Darius spread out in front of her. Each one told a story. The first bunch, bright and hopeful. The second, quiet and sorrowful. And now the single, wilted daisy, a warning that things were getting worse. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her. She knew the next step wouldn't be easy. It might change everything for Darius. But the time for waiting was over. Something had to be done. And soon. The storm had passed by Thursday morning. But Mrs. Thompson still felt it raging inside her. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Darius's tired face and that single wilted daisy. When the bell rang, the children shuffled into class one by one. But Darius didn't come. Her chest tightened. She waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Still no sign of him. She tried to focus on a lesson, but her eyes kept darting to the door, hoping he would appear. He never did. By the time the last bell rang that afternoon, Mrs. Thompson's mind was made up. Enough waiting. Enough wondering. She couldn't let fear keep her silent. She drove straight to Mrs. Garcia's office and demanded answers. "I haven't been able to reach you," Mrs. Thompson said urgently. "Darius wasn't in school again today. Something is wrong." Mrs. Garcia nodded gravely. "We filed for a welfare check. The police went to the house yesterday evening. The man answered the door and said everything was fine. Angela came out, but—" She sighed. She looked frightened. They couldn't force their way in without cause. Mrs. Thompson clenched her fists. "So what now?" "We just wait until something terrible happens." "No," Mrs. Garcia said firmly. "We'll push harder. But it takes time." Time was exactly what Darius didn't have. Mrs. Thompson knew it. She could feel it in her bones. That night, sleep escaped her once again. She sat by her desk with a notebook, scribbling down everything she remembered, every flower, every look in Darius's eyes, every word he whispered. Each note felt like a puzzle piece, but she couldn't quite see the picture they formed, until her eyes fell on the flowers again. The first bunch, bright, colorful, full of life. The second, quieter, almost sad. The third, a single wilted daisy. And then it hit her. The flowers weren't just gifts. They were messages. Silent cries for help. On Friday morning, Mrs. Thompson walked into her classroom with determination. She had already called the school principal, explained her suspicions, and demanded immediate action. If no one else would push hard enough, she would. By mid-morning, she got the call. Authorities were returning to the house, this time with social services and a legal order to investigate fully. The day dragged on like a slow clock. The students worked quietly, but Mrs. Thompson's ears rang with the memory of Darius's voice. He said if I tell, he'll make Mom worse. She tried to keep her face calm for class, but her heart thudded with dread. At dismissal, she lingered, unable to leave. The room felt too empty without him. She was still packing her bag when her phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Garcia. Her voice was heavy. "We went in. Angela's safe. But she's weak. Very weak. And Darius, he's here with me." Relief flooded through Mrs. Thompson so strongly her knees almost gave out. "Is he okay?" "He's shaken," Mrs. Garcia said softly. "But he's safe now." An hour later, Mrs. Thompson arrived at the district office. The moment she stepped inside, she spotted him sitting in a chair in the corner, clutching a small plastic cup of water. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and he stood quickly, almost dropping the cup. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, running into her arms. She hugged him tightly, fighting back tears. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you or your mom anymore." He nodded against her shoulder, but then pulled back. His little hand reached into his jacket pocket, fumbling. And then he pulled out another flower, a single, fresh daisy. Mrs. Thompson took it slowly, her fingers trembling, her eyes blurred with tears. "You saved this for me?" He nodded. "Mom said flowers mean you care. She always gave them to me when I was scared. I don't have much, but I wanted you to know I cared too. And I wanted help for her." The truth struck Mrs. Thompson like a wave. The flowers weren't just gifts. They were his language of love, his way of speaking when words felt dangerous. Every bloom had been a message, and she had finally listened. She broke down then, the tears spilling freely, not out of sadness, but out of the overwhelming weight of it all, the courage of the small boy, the quiet desperation in every flower, the unspoken bond they had built. She knelt in front of him, holding the daisy close to her heart. "Darius," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you are the bravest boy I've ever known, and I promise you, your mom will get better, and you will never have to be afraid again." His eyes searched hers, wide and tired but hopeful. "You promise?" "I promise," she said firmly. In the days that followed, everything began to change. Angela was taken to a safe place where she could recover. The man was removed from their lives. Darius stayed with relatives for a while, but Mrs. Thompson visited him often. She brought him books, warm meals, and sometimes flowers of her own. Every time he saw them, his face lit up. He no longer had to use them as a secret cry for help. Now, they were simply a reminder that he was loved, seen, and safe. Months later, when Darius returned to school, he walked in the classroom with a smile brighter than Mrs. Thompson had ever seen. He still carried a flower, but this time, he handed it to her without the weight of sorrow behind it. "For you," he said, "just because—" Mrs. Thompson held it tightly, tears slipping down her cheeks once again. But these were different tears, tears of relief, gratitude, and hope. The classroom buzzed with the sound of children's laughter, the sunlight streaming through the windows. And for the first time in a long time, Mrs. Thompson felt a peace settle in her chest. because she knew, deep down, that a boy who once had to beg for help with flowers was finally free to just be a child again. And that was why every flower he gave her would always leave her crying, not from sorrow anymore, but from the simple, powerful beauty of what they meant. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also and other to strengthen our community. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.